Wait for it. One more moment. You might think it's about to start, but it hasn't started yet. And we are live, I think. So, anybody watching this video on demand, which means you saw it on your subscription feed or somehow it was recommended to you, skip a few minutes ahead. This was done live, even though I'm here live, and it'll take me a few minutes to set up. So, go into the future, wait until we start, and don't wait till we start then. Go there. Okay, I'll see you in a moment. So, if you are currently watching, meaning you are live, you have an obligation as part of the people who can type in the chat. You need to tell me, can you see me? Can you hear me? And are they in sync? They're always in sync. I'm just using this as a way to wait for people to join. Derek already knows. He probably said it before. Okay, well, we got 13 people in here. Let us begin. So, before we go into Nodevember day 12, yes, I'm a day ahead. It's November 11th. We get it. Before we get into Nodevember day 12, I want to do an update on day 11, which was Hive. I said I would work on it a bit more, and here's what I got. It turned out that the glitchy bees weren't too bad. So, as long as you don't look too closely, pretty happy with that. And I didn't even showcase how some of them can have honey, some of them can't. Kind of the whole thing is glazed in honey. But I think this came out quite nicely. So that was day 11 Hive. You can go check it out. As for day 12, what is it that we are making? Day 12 is going to be Monument. Yes, Monument. So when I think monument, there are a few things. There's the big monuments, like the Statue of Liberty, the Eiffel Tower might be cool because it has all this scaffolding and stuff like that. Good for you, famous tuber. Maybe the Lincoln statue or something like that. But what I'm going to go for is I like this idea of making a modifier that takes an existing object and does something to it, just like with day 9, which I actually made a in-depth tutorial recently. It will come out soon. We took an object and we put fur on it. For monument, I'm going to go, maybe I will make a procedural model, but I'm going for something like this. Old monument, like ancient Greece or Egypt or Rome. It's going to be broken, it's going to be disheveled, and I think I might actually do a column. One thing that I really liked, if I have the image, and I wouldn't have thought about this one has part of it stripped away, almost like it's ceramic and one of the tiles came out. I think I want to use that. And yeah, I'm going to try to use every trick in the book to make a column look old and disheveled. Here's some Adobe stock reference. Yeah. Okay, so we got to make the thing. It's got to be blocky, etc. That is what we are going for. Okay, let's begin. Well, one more thing before we begin. I'm going to be using some nodes that you're not going to have in default Blender. To get those, just go to cgmatter.com. It will redirect you here. Go to free nodes, and you can download the add-on that will get you the nodes. Additionally, if you want the previous Nodevember stuff, that's for members, and I uploaded yesterday's right here. So you could click this. It will download day 11, for example. Let's begin. So, what is a broken column? It is a column with a bunch of procedural damage. Okay, easy enough. By the way, I thought Blender 5.0 was supposed to come out today, and I think it was, but it was delayed by a week for bug fixes, which turns out it's actually a good thing for a reason that add-on developers will understand. So I'm going to make day 12. There's a little hair here. Just get that little hair. Okay. Nodevember. Day 12, monument, and we are starting. Okay, so here is what I am thinking. I'm going to make the broken column. No, sorry, I'm going to make a column, a perfectly fine column, and then damage it as if It initially was, of quality, and then it is broken instead of just starting off broken, which are different approaches. So I'm going to get my reference over here, and I really just want reference for what the column should look like. So clearly it has this base and these lines. Which one do I like more? I kind of like the base from the first one and the detail from the second one. Okay. Well, to do that, am I inverted? No. To do that, what I need is to start with a flat kind of cube kind of thing. So let's start off with a cube. That cube is going to be not too tall. And there you go. End of tutorial. Next of all, we're going to stack some cylinders that do certain shapings. And if you've watched the last few, you already know what trick I'm about to employ. It's going to be the float curve generated coordinates trick. So let's add a cylinder. And I just need to do this to make it not glitchy. Let's add a cylinder like that. The cylinder is going to be thinner. And how tall? 1 unit tall, moved up by some amount. So now I'm going for this like middle section over here, not yet the tall component. Yes, we're going to do a lot of shading too. So we have this, and my goal is to shape it into these complicated shapes that geonodes aren't like optimized for. Well, if we can essentially draw them, that would be great. So I'm going to add side segments, a lot of them. And I'm going to set position, because yesterday the scale elements that I tried to do for the same purpose of growing and shrinking on the XY axis, that did not work. Don't know why, but it's fine. So I'm going to take the position. I'm going to multiply it by some factor. That factor is going to be 1 on the z-axis and then something special on the y-axis to grow and shrink it. That special thing is going to be dependent on the height of the cylinder. So as we go up, I want a coordinate system that goes from 0 to 1. That is in my generated coordinates notes. Again, for everybody live doing this at the same time, but especially for everybody watching this after the fact, in the description, there's going to be a link to getting these free nodes. Okay, so that's where I'm getting generated coordinates. Literally free. So as I go up on the z-axis, I want to shape this with a float curve. That's going to be on the x. That's going to be on the y. So you can see already I'm getting a cone. And I want to treat this as a thing that cuts away instead of grows. So before we do this, I am going to take 1, a scale of 1 as if I did nothing, and then subtract this contribution. So if I go like this, it's going to eat into it, if that makes sense. So now all we need to do is kind of shape it in some fancy way. I think this might have more linear stuff. And it's going to be a little hard to think about this because it's kind of inverted almost. I'm just going to make them all linear to begin with. And then I can also throw on a sign or something. So in the beginning, I cut away very little, actually. And then it's towards the middle-ish end that I start cutting away a lot of detail, which means this has to be higher. Again, I need to think backwards on this one. So like that, like that. That's not too bad. And then there's a limit to how much I can zoom in. I wonder if I can stretch this so I can add points in between. So cut out more, cut out less. How big can I make this? Yeah. I've never had a node this wide before. So cut out less, cut out more, cut out less. So that's how I'm getting these like lips over here, for example. Okay. Cut out more, cut out less. Amazing. And then at the top, I should have another hit of detail. Okay, that's pretty good. So before, after. You can see how much that helps. To add resolution, I'm going to add more side segments. That will let me make this nice and crisp, and let's also make this radially higher resolution. Okay, so given this, and now I'm going to assume I'm not going to play with this much anymore, so I'm just going to compress it back down. I can make it bigger in general. Yeah. I think in proportion, this ought to be, the base ought to be a little shorter. Okay, there we go. So that is the base of our column. The second section of it, which I think I'm going to end halfway through, although I could make it go to the top. But it is easier to only make it go halfway through. I'm going to do another cylinder, but for now, we have our platform, which that didn't go through. Platform. Why do you not like that? Platform. There we go. Shaping. I'm just going to consolidate whatever it is that I'm never touching again. Okay. We have that transform. We don't do much with that. And then we have, let's make this lower. We have our cylinder. Okay, so this can be, what do I want to call it? It's not the base, but it's like the, well, no, this can be called the base. And then if I do that, maybe this can be called the foundation. Every freaking time. The foundation. The foundation. And now I have this, I have that, and I join them together. Very, very simple. It's a wide node. Next, I'm just going to make a cylinder with these radially cut out sections, which I think we can use a bit of a hack to get right. And then I need to merge them all together and maybe do a Boolean at the top. So, take all this, add a cylinder, maybe, yeah, we could join everything at the end. Okay, so I have this cylinder. It should be roughly the same radius as the other thing, maybe a little bigger. Transform this upwards like that. And it should be, let's see, so this is 1, 2, 3, 2.5 times taller. I'm going to make it a 4. Yeah. And remember, I'm going to cut off the top. So really, it's going to be roughly like this tall. Okay. So one thing I'm seeing is, again, there's these like divots. And we could model that using like a radial thing, but with a low resolution cylinder such as this, you can see we already have these faces. And I think I want to exploit that. However, the whole thing is smooth. Well, we can try it. If I was to do that, you could either go inwards or outwards. You could treat it either way. I'm going to extrude every face individually, so you can kind of see the idea here. Is it better to go in or out? It's definitely easier to go out. And it doesn't break the geometry as much. Yeah. Yeah. Well, how many do we have, first of all? We have probably like 20 of them. I think I like this, and I'll make it smaller. So I think that's a good cheat to make that. And also, I don't want this on the top, so it's extruding literally everything. Luckily for us, we can take these n-gons at the very top here, and I can get rid of them. And now it's hollow, which might be what I want, but I guess I do want it to have geo. So what about we keep the n-gon, but we extrude everywhere that isn't an n-gon? And I made a note for this, cgmatter.com, is an n-gon. Okay. So I do that. What is face index? Yeah. Okay, so I check, is it an n-gon? Evaluate at index. I see. You can check a specific one. I'm going to check, is it an n-gon? And then, of course, I'm going to invert, which is also a node I made. Okay, so now it is only extruding these sides. And that's quite nice. We could then smooth, or we could leave that to the SDF. I think I'll leave it to the SDF. So if I take all this, I wonder if the tapage, the good old tapage, is good. And what I mean by that is if I merge by distance, does anything happen? No, which is good. That means it's kind of sealed. Because it's sealed, we're going to be able to run the mesh boolean using manifold mode, which is super fast to get this shape over here. So how am I going to cut out, this detailed thing? Super easy. We just make a cutter object, right? So that cutter object is going to be an icosphere. And we could just join these together so we can see. A high resolution icosphere moved upwards and a bit to the side. And then if I was to mesh boolean this way, let's see if that works out. So we take the difference, but using manifold. See, it likes that very nicely. And it's like so fast too. Like, look at that. So additionally, we can take this icosphere and run it through my distort node, cgmatter.com, with a low scale, high detail, low strength, lower strength, higher resolution, more detail, more roughness, slightly smaller scale. So before and after, and that should work with our mesh boolean. If I connect it here, okay? Before, after. Clearly, this could use a bit of work, but I like it. So what if I scale it on the Z and then move it upwards? Yeah, you could really get some nice custom situation over here. Pointing at the camera, pointing like this. There is a number. It's almost like, we could actually just see it being made live. I think that's pretty good, right? There is that tiny vertex over here. So I'm just gonna, is it the x-axis? Like that? No. I'm just gonna shift it until it works. Okay, good enough. So now we have this, we have that. So I actually don't want this anymore. And there is the basis for our pillar. Nice and prestige. That's the important part, prestige. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to take the foundation and make it just a little wider. Nothing crazy. And once we're happy with this now, I can join it all into one thing in terms of an SDF. So I'm just going to take this, compress anything that I don't expect to use again. And we can totally play with the extrusion, even go inwards. Before, after. I definitely like that more. And we could also, by the way, we could scale the elements that we extruded like that, if that makes any sense. That way there's a bit of a bigger gap between them. So let's do 0.9 before and after. 0.95. Just helps a little. And we could even go super low with this. So this is actually a case where I would say procedural modeling is superior. It's like great for this use case. Okay, so what was I doing? I was consolidating, and I'm going to do something gross. Bury yourself. Ah! My chair just broke. I sniffed too hard. What the fuck? 1 second. I've never had that happen. That felt dangerous. Wow, now I'm tall. I literally phlegmed so hard the chair broke. Okay, whatever. We'll proceed, even though there's no backrest. No, we won't. I'm gonna get myself a chair. 1 sec. And I'm gonna switch into a t-shirt. Talk amongst yourselves. I am going to put you here to motivate you to talk. Kind of out with the old. Okay, chair replacement done. I don't think I broke it. I think I just slid something I've never slid before. But now, new setup. Okie dokie. Where are we? We are consolidating. We love a good consolidation. So do that. Do that. That's getting mesh booleaned. Great. So all of this is going to be a single node group that I'm going to call the pillar. Or at least like the main part of the pillar. So pillar, do I want any control over this? Nah, I don't care. Like I like it the way it is. The only thing is this distortion used for the manifold's a little whack. How do I want to do this? Lower scale? Lower roughness? It's almost like too distorted, which I don't think it is using any distortion now. Okay, that's a little nicer. We can figure out the rest later on. So there we go. And all of this turns into a pillar. Now, all of this, all in all, isn't too much geometry, which is really good because I want to convert it into an SDF. So 25,000 faces. I see money. 1 second. Let's all appreciate the money. Let's see, is this nice? Okay, it is nice. Okay, Akira Studios, thank you for all the Blender content you've made. I started off with Blender 5 years ago. Your content's easy to understand and helped me a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you, Akira Studios. I have nothing to give you other than great tutorials. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Very nice. Um, what was I doing? I wanted to make it into an SDF. And yeah, okay, so what I'm trying to say is I want a high detail SDF, and luckily for us, we don't have too much geometry. Akira got me tripping. So mesh to SDF. Okay, that calculated super fast, and then grid to mesh like this. Okay, so of course this is a low resolution, but even when I make it high resolution or higher, you can see it calculates much faster. I always recommend bringing down the threshold so it goes closer to the surface with its like remeshing. And already that is almost max detail, right? Needs a bit more. And maybe this needs to go down. Okay. So all in all, this remeshing took a fifth of a second, roughly. And we're going to end up baking this anyway, so that's super nice. Yeah. And then we could totally do something in the middle here. I'm still not too familiar with what a lot of these do. Laplacian. I think Laplacian gets the derivative, which is why we have exclusively the edges here. What else do we have? We have grid fillet. Fillet is going to smooth. Do I like that? Nah, that's shit. SDF, grid offset, grid median. Offset's going to basically, that was a mistake, is basically going to inflate it. So before and after just inflates it a little. And you can use that for Boolean tricks. I know we could also add a noise to specifically where the edges, I think. So what I'm saying is if we can isolate this area, which we know we can with Laplacian or something, if we then add distortion, that's a good thing? I'm not sure. Let's try. So I'm going to do math, addition, maybe like a tiny number like 0.1. What does that do? That breaks it. 0.01? Okay, so the math works. It just breaks. So what if I use a noise texture? What happens? So noise texture goes in here. Okay, so we can do this, but we want to isolate it to certain areas. But you can see how this might be useful. So detail 4, scale low, and I want to isolate this to the edges. I want to isolate it to the edges. How do I do that? I'm not too used to grid math yet. So I'm going to make this lower resolution while I experiment. Not that low resolution. Okay, so we have a noise texture. It does that. If I subtract, same deal. What if I make the contribution tiny? 10%? No, it still destroys it. Because now the interior, which is negative, can become positive. So the SDF stores information about what is and isn't the surface. So this just throws it for a loop. Could I somehow drive the offset with this? Yes. So I'm going to offset by a tiny number. And this should eat in and out. And indeed shake it all about. Okay, what's the issue here? It needs a single value. Grid offset, grid Laplacian, grid mean curvature. What does this one do? Okay. So we can smooth out the edges, which means we can... Let me try something. So I'm going to mesh... No, I'm going to SDF Boolean. This from this. Look at that. And why is that the case? I intersect them. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to break apart one of these and then have them eat each other in a sense. So we have this. I feel like that should isolate the edge, right? If we were to intersect them. I mean, clearly not. Okay, so that does kind of isolate the edges. So what if instead I do an offset that's tiny? So that's going to go here. Okay, so we have this. I grow it a little. I take this, the bigger one, minus the smaller one. Okay, so that's going to give us this, but I do believe it's different in that there is now an interior. So we've basically isolated the boundary. And then I want to distort the outer one. Yeah. This might make no sense, but bear with me. So I'm going to do this. This isolates the boundary. What if I make this negative? Does that make any sense? No. No. Okay, so this is the boundary. Maybe this we can break apart with a noise to get that. But now we also have the interior. So now what if I mesh Boolean union like that? Okay. This isn't something we couldn't do in. That's kind of what I want. Difference? Like my end goal here, so I'm just experimenting, but my end goal here is to cut out A. That is what is up. Isolate the edge before the SDF having 2 over. I don't know what that means. But either way, I figured it out. And once I understand this in a moment, I will explain to you what I've learned. But yeah, that's crispy. That's crispy. What if I make this bigger? What happens? It eats more of that away, huh? Higher detail. Higher roughness. Yeah. And that eats away everywhere. In a really nice way. I like that. Okay, so let me explain what I understand. So we have this. We turned it into an SDF, okay? And an SDF is basically a volumetric representation. So for this, let me just look at this as the output. So we turned it into an SDF, so there's pretty much no difference. It's a little lower res. I then did an offset, which you can think of as inflating. So it's a bit bigger. If I take the bigger one and subtract the smaller one, now you just have the shell, the difference between them, which is going to look the same, but now it's hollow. So if I was to wireframe view, let's see if we can actually see it. It's hard to see what happened, but something did happen. So now we've isolated the shell, so we have a bit of an exterior. And then on that, I added some noise, which is going to reveal some of the interior, because again, it's just a shell. And then I took one and subtracted the other. So I took this one and I ate away the noise, which creates this. I think that's a pretty good explanation, actually. And The thickness of this destruction is dependent on the offset, although it doesn't seem to care, because a shell is a shell is a shell. So that's going to eat away at it more. Okay, okay. So maybe I divide this by 1.5, just so it's a little softer. And for visualization, let's have the spreadsheet open. For visualization, we might want cavity makes it a bit extreme, but I guess it's easier to see what's happening. Okay, so we got to be careful with this because instantaneously we went from this to this, which yes looks better, but we also went from 25,000 faces to 290,000. But do know that there's a threshold slider, no, an adaptivity slider, which when you increase it, you can think of it as a decimate, okay? So here is before, here is after. It will smooth or lower the detail of certain areas, but help quite a bit. At the moment, I'm fine with all of this. Need some grid tutorials. Yes, I need to understand grids first. I mean, clearly I get something, but I want to practice more. Because I think it's good for exactly stuff like this. Okay. Okay. So before I continue, I could do more SDF stuff. And because this SDF is like fixed, I don't think you can bake a grid as far as I understand it. Let's try. Bake a grid. Yeah, it doesn't like that. So for now, we're going to assume we can't do that. What I was going to say is once we have this, we should bake so we're not calculating again. But also, I don't think we are done with the SDF because clearly it's very useful. So what if we also use the SDF to cut away stuff? Okay, what do I mean? What I mean is if I take a grid, no, a cube, I'm going to join these together only so that I can see the overlap. I'm going to make this super thin, and I'm going to bring it upwards, okay? So I want you to imagine that this is like a knife. It's like a cutter plane. What I can do is I can use these cutter planes to get rid of those sections, which will make it look kind of like cuts, or like stone that's about to fall over, maybe. Let's try it. So I'm going to do this. This in itself to interact with the booleans, or we could do like boolean manifold or whatever. But if we wanted to interact with the SDF booleans, we need it to go mesh to SDF, which should calculate quite fast. And I believe it will pick the smaller of the two voxels. I'm not sure about that. So if I was to do this, it computes quite fast, which makes sense. Okay. What I was saying is I can take this and I can do another Boolean difference where I cut this away. Can you kind of see what I mean? And then if I was to bring this down, it kind of looks like, let me get some reference. It's starting to look like this kind of cut. Not exactly, but like kind of where the fragments might be. Cracks, maybe. It's not really cracks because it's more so like literally a chunk missing. Or like, you understand what I'm saying. So how do I want to do this? And do I want to do this? Well, I'm thinking about give me a second to process. Okay, so I do like this idea, but I want to automate it so I don't have all of these planes. So what I'm going to do is before we do any of this SDF stuff, before we do any of it, I'm actually, and this is going to be a bit out of left field, but follow me here. I'm going to look at this geometry with a Voronoi texture. What is he thinking? Okay, Voronoi texture. What I'm thinking is we can use this to generate kind of cracks like this, especially if I look at distance to edge, like that. We can use this to generate cracks, and maybe this could be something that happens after the fact, maybe. Or I can use it to generate SDFs. So let's try something like that. So suppose that I'm going to skip this step for now. We might come back to it later to take out chunks. Suppose that we take all this and we bake it. Okay, because right now, this is taking 400 milliseconds. So half a second doesn't sound like much, but it can be annoying. So I'm going to bake. Make sure to set this to disk just so you can save faster. We will bake frame 1, and now all of the sudden, you can see it only takes us like a millisecond because it's all baked, right? So now what I can do is I could look at the Voronoi texture now that there's an even distribution of things, okay? Specifically, I care about distance to edge, and I want to take this and up the detail, lower the scale so it's not as insane. And then vaguely the idea is, we're going to need to work on it, but vaguely the idea is to push it on its normal. So if I have like a crack over here, I can take anything that's near that line and either push it in or push it out. So in other words, I'm going to offset off the normal, which is just going to inflate it basically. So this is kind of similar to the SDF offset in a way. I'm going to scale by like a custom factor, so you can see what I'm doing here. That factor is going to be based on the Voronoi, right? But we almost want it to be the opposite. So if it's close to a crack, so if you look at this, the cracks are black, we want it to be the opposite. So I'm going to run a invert node. See what that does. Yes, but I need to up the contrast. So maybe let's do a map range where I can actually see what I'm doing. I'm going to start by inverting this, but then make the proximity tiny. So in other words, it's only going to affect things very close, and then why is it doing that? So we have it scale off the normal, where it's never negative. Okay, so we have it do that, but it should be first of all going inwards. So I'm going to multiply by 0 just to see, and then I'm going to make it negative. You see? Full prestige. Although kind of the issue with this approach is it kind of looks independent from everything else, right? But it's a good start. So now everything we do is basically dependent on this Voronoi. So you can see that nice prestige. Yeah. Okay. So now the name of the game is getting this to look interesting. One way to do that is to use the detail and the roughness. So this is definitely going to be the way to go. So I want you to look at this line right here, for example. Okay. As I increase the roughness, like that in itself cracks a little. Okay. And I don't want this to be very extreme. I actually want it to be pretty subtle. So like one way to do that, of course, is to decrease the contribution. It's probably what we're going to go with. But another is if I use the same coordinate system. So I have these, let's view it. I have these edges, which roughly correspond to these islands. which means I can use this to drive a random number. Okay, so you see these numbers kind of, how do I say it? They align with this. So let's see. If I look at this line right here, and then this line right here, and then I view this, you can kind of make this out. So what I mean is I can multiply by some factor, and then multiply by its fragment number. I don't know if it's going to look good. It's just an idea. So let's see. Before and after. So the idea is the crack is not going to be of a constant strength. I think even though, yeah, I think I like that. And then the final thing is note that both of these Voronoi textures rely on a coordinate system, right? So if I do position, and then I add some offset, we expect the cracks to stay the same, but just kind of move upwards and downwards. Isn't this cool? That's pretty cool. What that means is if I want to distort the lines, there's nothing stopping me from taking a noise texture, turn off normalize, okay? Random contribution, add this in, which looks crazy, but if I take the noise, and I'll clean this up in a moment, but if I take the noise and I scale it, so I could scale it by 0, saying don't use this, or as I increase it, it keeps the lines, but it just breaks them up a little. Makes them not straight. More detail, more roughness. Do I like it though? Before, after. Zoom in. Before, after. It's definitely good. Maybe a little less. But it's definitely good. Before, after. Yeah, that's definitely better than not having it. Okay, any comments? Warp it with vertex position maybe. This is actually really cool. Is it possible to get the mask from the SDF Boolean? Then you could multiply by the cracks. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what this person is saying, I believe, is if I don't look at this bake, but I look at this, remember we got this based on, let's get this way out of the way, based on something. We got this look where some of it's kind of eaten inwards based on this noise. So before, after. This in itself makes up a grid that I could turn into a mesh, just this thing that I'm cutting away. Okay? So I'm using this to cut away. And what he's saying is there can be cracks. There should be cracks. More crack on the streets. There should be cracks, but only kind of near the destroyed sections. It's kind of motivated. So I don't know if this is exactly what you meant, but I can use this as a proximity map. So this is an example where this doesn't need to be super detailed. And it can have lower geometry. So this is a perfect example. So let's say I bake this as well, making sure that it is a disk bake. And by the way, if you don't want to click this every time, I think the way you do it is you go into the modifier, and in bake you set a default. So by default, I'm going to use the disk now. Then it won't ask me anymore. But if I bake this, we now have our pillar and the thing we cut away. So you can almost see. So this section's empty. And you can see here it's smooth, whereas this section's destroyed. And that's where it exists, okay? So I do these cracks, but then I multiply by saying, look at how close are you to the surface. So let's see what that looks like. Okay? So it's going to be quite black where it's stripped away, and then the opposite for the opposite. I'm going to map range, higher contrast. Okay, so you're seeing this white splotch over here, for example. What does that represent? It represents a perfectly smooth area. So does up here, which is why you see that splotch. So we take everything and we multiply it by this. So the question is, what's the difference? The difference is, if you now look at this area over here that's already torn, the cracks don't go through it. And it makes it look less like we just overlaid something and more like it contributes to the logic of it. And because we did that, I do want to motivate this by, make sure these Voronoi textures are the same, by the way, by adding more. So before, after, before, after. Yeah. So I think it's worth having, like it looks more sensical, but we could have these cracks here just barely, 20%. Does that make any sense? This does not make sense because I didn't multiply. So I say 25%, so that way the cracks are here, but not as much as, this. So maybe 20%. And I think that is good and deserves a node group. Okay, so we have all this. This is going to be our distortion for the Voronoi textures. That represents the cracks. So this is our distorted coordinate system that then generates a random number per fragment, which we then do this whole chain of, I want to move things inwards by the normal, but in a fancy way, where I first of all look at the crack pattern, so moves in on the cracks. This negative number means move in instead of out. We then multiply it by a random fragment number, so some fragments move more than others, and then we say avoid the areas that are already destroyed. So a lot of this actually isn't expected to be changed. Some of it is, but most of it is not. So we'll clean it up. And we could do this internally. Yeah. So I'm going to turn all this into a node group. This node group is basically the cracks and it takes in the column and the thing that's eaten away. So I'm going to say column and like eat away, like a negative, what's a good way to put it? The area that's eaten away, like corroded, maybe? Might be a good way to put it. And then inside of here, now that we have that, I'm more comfortable cleaning it up. Okay. And then adding parameters where we need it. Because this might be something that is very easy to play with without much cost. So I think that's fine. I'm going to assume they're not going to play with the amount of distortion. I'm assuming that is fine. We'll use a noise texture. All of that is based on a position. So this is our distortion for the Voronoi texture that has a scale. So maybe like crack scale. We then do this whole chain of multiplications. This should definitely be a parameter. How strong is it? whatever it is, I'm going to multiply it by negative, not just -1, but -10. Okay? The reason for this is you can see ultimately the number is super small. Okay? Or divide by -10. So I want the crack scale to be something like 0 to 1. So that way the numbers aren't like super tiny and hard to input. This should be its own. This should be crack strength. Okay, we take a proximity. We do the blah, blah, blah. Okay. I think that is quite clean as far as node groups go. I don't know if it's legible, but by the way, when you have a multiply, you can use Alt-S to flip them because multiplication order doesn't matter. So, up to you. Like this, like this, like this, like that. Okay. By the way, we should probably name this Nodevember Day 12 Monument, which is going to be the same name as this, which is going to be the same name as the modifier itself. By the way, I've been using a lot of custom nodes, maybe more so in the beginning of the video. Eroded is a good name. Corroded is more of an acid. Eroded. Is it 1R or 2R? Okay. What was I saying? I used a lot of things in the beginning. You can get them at cgmatter.com. Free nodes section. Just download those nodes so you can follow along or use them for different projects. And again, member site. I have to pimp out, occasionally throughout this live stream. This is where everything lives. So recently, and this isn't out yet, this is only for, the people who pay, I made a post about fur. And I'm fine showing this because the valuable thing is the early access and the project file. I go back to the fur thing, which was Nodevember Day 9, but we make it a proper tutorial, so it's not a 3-hour what is happening kind of thing. So check out cgmatter.com. Okay, so we got the cracks. I actually don't need the word crack if we know that's the case. Okay, there we go. So what I was saying is when we divide by -10, now we can pick a number that makes more sense between 0 and 1. So, 0.3, and then the scale is the scale. And note that it's weaker, or somewhat, avoiding the destroyed areas. And this looks better in a way without the cavity. Looks more like a mesh. That makes sense. Okay, what was I saying? So we have most of this actually, but I do want to do one more thing. Do I? I do. I'm going to do one more thing, which is I want to cut away actual pieces. Okay, so not just, so for example, remember when we did this like SDF for a grid, which I cannot see for some reason. Remember when we did the SDF for this? I want to cut away actual pieces, but those pieces should be a bit more three-dimensional. How am I going to do that? Well, I have the grid. I'm going to distribute points inside the grid. Looks like that. Let's make that bigger. Does it not like SDF grid? Oh, it does. It's just tiny. So we have the grid that's a 3D representation of this. And I want a bunch of points. You'll see why soon. But I want them in a nice grid. Okay? With the spacing of this. Are there even points? Are they tiny? No, we have no points. Instead of that, maybe it's because of the kind of grid. To density grid. Let's see. Likes that a lot better. I want to distribute a whole bunch of points. And you might be wondering, what's he thinking? What's his angle? What's his angle? I'll show you my angle. My angle, and this, what I'm about to do, is purely for visualization purposes. I'm going to pick a number that's the spacing, like 0.1. The radius then is half of that. Divide by 2, connect that. What I'm doing is I'm taking our column and making it discrete. Okay? So I took our column and I'm making it a bunch of points. What is the point of turning it into points? I can now take certain chunks of these and, by the way, it's limited by this. I can take certain chunks of these and turn them into convex hulls. Okay? How do I do that? Well, I have this. I'm then going to separate, no, not separate geometry, split two instances. Okay? So now all of this turns into one instance, but what am I going to separate by? I'm going to use a Voronoi texture, which on the points looks like this, you know, same kind of thing. But you can see each set of like 30 points get their own island, right? So if I take this color and run it through a hash value just takes a thing like a color and outputs like a integer, something that plays nice with group ID. You can see we now have 664 instances. Let's make that tinier. We have 22 instances. And now if I scale instances, doesn't like that. I'm just trying to show you they're separate. Okay, let's do my separate by index node, cgmatter.com. We're going to separate by the instance. You can see we now have different chunks of the column, each of which can be a convex hull. Okay? So low-res approximation of the thing. But now that we have these chunks, we can cut away, right? And it's pretty cheap to do as well. So if I set this to 3, all of a sudden we have more detail. And if you're looking at the spacing here and you want it to be more exact, that is a function of this resolution, I believe. There we go. So now we've split this into chunks. And I don't want to, you know, like have this be part of the model, but rather use it to cut things away. And this is a job for manifold. And I also need to say which ones to cut away, and that should be pretty random. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete some of these instances before they're even convex hulled, and that's going to be based on a random probability. You see what I mean? And I'm only going to keep a few of these because remember, these represent what gets cut out. Okay, so right now there are 18 instances. I'm going to realize them so that they're one low-res piece of geometry. This in itself can become an SDF, and then we do the whole business. Okay? So let me consolidate a little so that you can kind of see what I mean. So keep everything that we intend to change exposed. Now that we see this, we don't actually need to do the radius. That was just like, you know, for visual clarity. And there might be a way to do this with just raw Voronoi now that I think about it. Nah, I'm not sure how that would work. Either way, I realize it to instances, right? This gets converted into an SDF, mesh to SDF. Okay, so now this is a SDF in itself. And, so this again is for clarification. We have this. We should have this. So mesh to SDF grid, grid to mesh, 0.01. Okay, so we have this column that's made out of an SDF. I can also have these chunks that are much lower res that are made, what is this voxel size? 0.01. Okay, we also have this that's made out of an SDF, and would you believe it, if we subtract one from another, so we take this original, we take the difference, and we look at it, well, it ain't working. Why is that? We have that. We have that. Let's bring down the probability to 0.5. Okay, so you can see it's kind of working. My guess is the issue is that they're slightly smaller than the mesh itself. Okay, so if I look at these points or whatever, the convex hulls, they're slightly smaller than the shell of which they're composed. So if that is the case, all I would need to do, I believe, is scale elements like that. So they're a bit bigger. And now, did that make any difference? Okay, so this is an example of what I mean. But it doesn't like that for some reason. Why does it not like that? So you can definitely see what I'm going for. I just don't know what the issue is. Anybody know what the issue is? Merge cut into blocks. Thank you for the kind words. The hive result I showed earlier, but just so I don't need to do it again, this is what it ended up being. What is the issue? What is the issue? So we have convex hull. This could be subtle. And what I mean is it could be these numbers I never mess with. So you can see I just messed with the number and something happened. So let's see. What if I do that? What if I do that? No. Definitely don't want that. Okay, we take one from the other. What if I intersect? So I take this SDF, I take this SDF, and I look at where they intersect. That kind of works. I mean, no, that definitely works. But what is the issue here? The issue might be that it is better to do it one at a time rather than all the chunks at once, I would believe. Did I change anything? Is that working well all of a sudden? Okay, let's bring up the probability. Oh, am I doing the opposite? Yeah, I'm doing the opposite. So take that. Take this. Like, it's kind of working. Just not the way I would want it to. I think it is because I'm doing many at once. I don't think it likes that. So to test that theory, I'm going to separate by index, custom node, cgmatter.com. And I'm going to separate out a specific instance. So this is going to let me look at one chunk at a time, right? And then my question is, does this play nice? So I'm going to go here. Eh, kinda. Okay, so that's a chunk. This cuts out of somewhere, presumably. Right there. I think that's playing nicer. Okay. Well, let me try getting rid of that, because I don't want to do a loop or whatever. Let's say I bring down the scale, so now there's many tiny ones. It just needs to approximately be correct. If anybody knows, do not feel shy leaving a comment. Yeah, nobody knows. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Yeah. You know what? I have an idea. What if we skip the convex hull altogether? Okay. So what's my idea? I have these things that I separate, and then instead of doing a convex hull, I'll do SDF. I'll do points to SDF. So now I'm just getting there in a different way. And now I wish I did have the radius, right? Okay, what's that give me? What about this? Too low res. Okay, so here's our chunks. And no. No, no, no. Oh. Oh. Whoops. That is better. That is much better. The only issue is some of these strips here. Okay, so I wonder what that is. Yeah, it's almost like we have to get ridiculous for this to work. Is it the voxel resolution? That was a mistake. Because remember, every time you divide by 2, it gets 8 times more resolution. Okay. So let's say we do that. Then the meshing is dependent on the threshold, O1. Okay. That fixed the glitchiness. Cool. And now it's, it can cut away nicely. Great. But I don't want to... Yeah. It's close. It's like it might not even be worth to do it if it's going to be this glitchy. That's not bad though. Let's just make it super, super rare. Okay. That I'm not annoyed by. That was a mistake. So when I bump the detail up to 1, it's now going to make thousands of instances, which is a mistake. How long have we been going? an hour and some. So I guess the question is, let's say we did this, right? And then we put it in our network. Does that play nice? Well, to find out, we have to bake. We have to bake. What's this give us? It works, right? Like the chunks are missing. And then the cracks do work. The question is it worth it though? Like at this point, I could just take areas and extrude them inwards, or even better, run the mesh boolean. Like I want to do it with an SDF, but this just seems wrong. Let's see, I'm just gonna do a test. I want to see what this looks like. When I do it with like mesh boolean instead. Okay, so we go back here, bake, bake. Okay, so now we have this nice version with the cracks, which is 300,000 faces, but mesh, the manifold thing is quite fast. So now I do want this convex hull. Okay. And remember, all of this, its point was to generate these fragments that make it up. Okay, so what do we got? We got this. This should be the input here, which will create a grid of points, which will create oh. I'm just some of the detail, some of the nodes got lost. Okay, so now I have these chunks. I'm going to make them bigger. So split to instances, delete geometry. Let's keep 10% of them. Okay. I make them convex hulls, but that should be after the fact. So now I have all these convex hulls, and my question is, can we cut one from another? That's my question. And who will give me my answer? Mesh Boolean, definitely manifold, although I don't know if it will consider this a manifold. Did it? Did it though? It did. But it's uggo. What if I did float? Exact will just crash my computer. Weird. So let's see, there's these lines right here. It's almost like it's not reaching. So let's see, before. That should definitely be reaching it. Let's try a different seed. How do I do that? Yeah. Yeah, this is just not the way to go. Like, I like the idea, and I feel like the logic is there, but it's just messy. So maybe one thing we can do is, somebody mentioned blocks. I'm going to try that, but if that doesn't work, I'm just going to move on, because this modeling's dope already. So to do blocks, do we have a brick texture? We do. We do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same idea from before, which might sound crazy, but I'm going to try it. So I'm going to turn this into a density grid, which will let me distribute points in the grid. Okay, so we get this, set it to grid, and then the spacing is going to be dictated by a number like this. And then the radius, which turns out to matter if I do want to do points to SDF, is going to be half of this. So that way when I look from the side view, they are perfectly touching. So before, after. Okay, so we have that, and I only want to keep ones that kind of create bricks or cut out bricks, however you want to think about it. So if I look at a brick texture, what does that look like? Looks like that. It's kind of hard to see. So I'm going to go pure white and pure black. And then what is it using as a coordinate system? You'd imagine the position. I'm just going to see if I can get this right. Okay, so now we have slices like this. It's almost like ill-equipped to do this. I'm just trying to get this to split into blocks. We could just, you know, fine, I'll just do it myself, kind of thing. Let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to take my generated coordinates, which goes from 0 to 1 on every axis, including the z, for example. And I want to separate out these strips, which I'm also going to do on the x and y. I can do that by taking this and comparing it to, like, I don't know, 0.5, right? So now this is a strip, but I want this to repeat. So because this goes from 0 to 1, to get it to repeat, I'm going to multiply it by like 10. So we have 10 iterations and run it through a fraction. So now we go 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 10 times. Classic trick. Make this a little less sensitive. Okay, now we have that. Okay. Then I want it to be the same situation on the x-axis, which will look like that. And then I want it to be the same situation. We might change the aspect ratio of the blocks, but on the y-axis. Okay. I then add their contributions, which I made a node for. It's called multi-add. This will let you just add a bunch of things. So silly, but so useful. Okay, so now we have all of these, and I want to make sure that we clamp this so it can't go higher than 1. Okay, and now the only issue is it seems like the Z ones are like stretched, and that's just because of the aspect ratio, right? So 0 to 1 is taller here. So it's almost like what we could do is we could not bias it. So let's see, separate position. What would that look like? Okay. Now, okay, X, Y, Z. I can make Z. It's almost like we need the aspect ratio of the thing, which is fine. We can get that. It's literally just the bounding box. But let's say we have that. So that's our grid. I then want to separate. by the selection. So now we only have this grid left over, if you can kind of tell. That is turned into an SDF using the points to SDF with the radius. And let's see what that looks like, right? So I'm going to take, let's start over here. So I have my, column that was SDF'd somewhere in the process. I then want to subtract this away at a small voxel, almost working. And then what if I don't divide the radius by 2? You can see it's trying to cut out the grid, right? So if I just plug this in here, we have this grid, which is exactly what I wanted. Thin grid. And maybe it should be higher resolution, right? So I'm just going to divide by 2. Yeah, this just isn't the way to go, is it? I'm going to try one last calculation, and then I'm just going to pivot, I think. Yeah. Like, in theory, it works at a high enough resolution, but that's not worth my time. Okay, let's get rid of all that. So as it stands, we have something quite simple. So let's consolidate. So we take this, we turn it into an SDF, which gets offsetted and Boolean. That's going to be the shell. We then run this calculation to kind of destroy that section that we then cut away so that we get this eroded edge. We turn this into a mesh, and along with that, okay. So all of this should be a node group. I'll call it SDF processing, where it takes in a column. It outputs a column and the eroded area. Okay, that goes there, nice and simple. And then we apply the cracks. And if all is well, we get this. Okay. So let's say that we like this. I want to make one high resolution version so that we can start shading. And to do that, I would definitely want to know the voxel size at every step along the way. Okay. So that's going to be the voxel size. Let's say I make it 8 times denser, which is what dividing by 2 does, and then I rebake. That will give me 1. That will give me 2. And now it's just a high resolution version. Okay. Let's start shading this bad boy, and then we'll see if there's anything to revisit. So set material, and this part's also going to be very, very easy, especially if we use the proximity and stuff like that. So let's actually store it. Remember, we got that proximity over here. So I'm actually just going to store that. in case we want to use it for the shading. So like what is exposed and isn't exposed. Okay. Okay, so we have a material called material. I'm going to call it column, and let's view what that looks like. And I expect the mesh is going to do some heavy lifting with the look of this. Let's go for our classic setup where it's Nodevember, so no HDRI is not allowed. Sky texture, though, is a node and therefore is allowed. We'll make that like this. Okay. So it's not too visible yet, but that's just because it's like pure white. There's no detail here. I'm going to darken the column, and now you can start seeing this like crazy amount of detail. Okay. So for the image, I want to go for something like this, which is very easy to do. But then I also like the exposed areas being like smoother than the others. So we could just make two materials and blend them, right? Okay. Well, if I wanted to do this, I'm going to sample this color. And in fact, here's a cool trick of the trade. Hover over this, hit E, and do this. Now we have a whole color spectrum. Something like that. So when I look at this and I run it through it could be as random as a noise texture, but it should probably be motivated. Okay. What coordinate system should it use? Object coordinates? Okay, so we have something like that I can move through this color ramp. Again, I'm probably going to edit this, but this looks pretty good. Yeah, especially as I crank up the roughness, add detail, make the scale bigger. So like this, for example, could be our like rough stone. And then if I was to take this, it should also motivate the bump mapping for sure. So here's that. Before, after, and I guess we should also run this through a shade smooth. Oh, and let's run it through a bake since we did the crack part. We don't want that to calculate. Okay, bake to disk. Great. Now it should update much faster. Yeah. So before, after, with color. Okay. Yeah. And you see how it goes from like this to this? That could be dependent, for example, on something like the proximity map, which remember shows us what areas are close to others or something like that. Let's try map range, go from 0 to 0.1. Yeah, now we can see all that detail. So this can help motivate something. Make it super sharp. So that way the material kind of matches the modeling, which is something you always want to do if you can. You don't want it to be disjoint. Okay, so let's see. When it's set to 0.09, it looks like this. As it gets bigger, it gets brighter. Okay, so let's say I was to connect this here. What does that look like? So from 0 to 0.1. Does that make sense? So again, 0.09 is where it's smooth. Yes. Okay, there we go. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's not the final result, but you see these eaten away sections that are exposed. That can be kind of a darker rock than the other thing. So they're motivating each other is kind of the point. Yeah, that's looking nice. Okay, and we got to remember that the lighting could be not good, you know, which might be messing us up. I feel like we should be looking at this on an overcast day. Yeah, we're getting close to photorealism. I feel like. And I do have a couple tricks up my sleeve, don't worry. Okay. Should I set up a camera? Yeah, I'm gonna set up a camera. That way we can be consistent with our lighting and everything. Okay, so zoom out. Damn, this is looking pretty photoreal, in my opinion. And we could run this through a 4 each zone, the game would be over. Not playable. If we are to do this, let's go to the properties. Let's go to the resolution. And is this one where I want to zoom? Or do I want to be up close? I'm never, ever up close. So let's try that. 30. But I want to see the top of it. Like I could do the thing where it's fallen over. I think it looks more impressive the way I had it. Okay. So let's say we do this camera angle. I then want to make sure that I get my lighting correct, and then I can choose which way it's facing. So what do we got? We got viewport display, don't see the background. That way it's not distracting. And then the world, I rotate to taste. Ooh, 224. Let's remember that number. So 420 versus 224. That's a hard choice. I think this one's definitely better. Okay, so we have that. Then we can choose the sun altitude. It really depends. Like, both of them look good. Okay, I'm going to go for this. Yeah. And the sun should definitely be weaker. Okay. That is a start. It's a really good start. Okay. So I said I had some tricks up my sleeves for the materials. What is that trick going to be? First of all, I just want to see what happens if I invert this. Wow, we could get totally different types of columns. Like, I could almost argue for that being the one. This just looks so good. I'm very happy with how it turned out. Okay. So what are the tricks? The tricks are to add wear, edge wear to certain areas. Like here, it's like so smooth. And you could see that, like there's almost like a accumulation of stuff in certain areas. There's a few ways to do that. The easiest way, of course, is to use an ambient occlusion node, which will exactly isolate those areas. So in that case, what I would do is I would run a color ramp to basically invert this. And now you could see all of a sudden we've like isolated all of this like detail areas. And then what you do is, I don't know, you expose like a different BSDF or you do whatever you want. So let's see. Diffuse BSDF, like that, like that, like that. Clearly that was not it. Because of the alpha. Okay. And then what do I want for this one? This could be, it could either be, I mean, those should be the worn areas. So it's going to be kind of yellow, pretty dark, very dark, and very rough. And because it's so weathered, I would use the noise texture with object coordinates. Just really mess it up. It's not hitting correctly. Before, after, why? Is it the filter thing? I don't really know how the filter thing works. So it was at 0.1, and now it's at 1. Okay, so that seems to matter. And then with this one, it was 0.1, and now it's 1. Okay, so I'm just going to keep it at 1. I don't really know what that means. And now I mix between the two. Okay, and let's see. What kind of gains did we get from that? Oh, and totally, this is one of those rare opportunities. By the way, hold down Control to do a good old switcheroo. This is one of those rare opportunities where our render is kind of vertical. So what I mean by that is I can just go like this. Usually that's not the case. Almost all renders are like horizontal in my experience. Okay, so this is before, okay, and this is after. Can you not tell a difference? Same over here. Okay, so we got to make this more intense. So the white goes like that. Before, after, and now before, after. Yeah. I'm not saying I like the BSDF, but I'm saying it's working. I do something like this. Almost like a corroded green. I don't want to just go black because then I could just, do that in compositing. Okay. Another trick, and I might come back to this, but I think it looks better. Another trick to isolate areas of interest are not just ambient occlusion, but the bevel node. What? The bevel node? I'll show you why. The bevel is a smoothed out version of the normals. Okay, big whoop. Normal, bevel. What that means is if you look at the distance between these, the difference between these, it's going to isolate edges. Okay? That's a classic CG matter trick. So this is isolating edges, whereas this is isolating curvature, or like areas where the light doesn't hit. You can see that, right? And then the question is, what do I do with those areas? I could, again, diffuse BSDF or something. Those areas. Just to show, yes, I indeed know they're here. So before, after. Okay? Now the question is, what do I want to do with that? Maybe something quite similar? Okay, can we tell the difference? Before, after, before, after. Not really. We could make the distance smaller so that they're kind of sharper edges. It's kind of like a pointiness map, I guess is a way to think about it. Okay, let's see. So this is our original, and this is our new. Yeah. Yeah. And then what if I add some sheen? Sheen is used for dust. I like sheen. So here's sheen, no sheen. Sheen, no sheen. Okay, so let's bring this up. So just so you can see, if I make this like yellow, for example, I'll make it green. So here's the sheen, and then as I bring down the roughness, you can see it's almost like dust accumulates on certain areas, which we could do. Okay, well, first of all, it's going to be like a very dim yellow. No sheen, sheen. No sheen, sheen. Yeah, so if you look at the base over here, it's like years of dust has accumulated. And then to drive it even better, let's do a good old trick. Voronoi texture, what's he thinking? What's he thinking? Well, I'm going to take object coordinates, make this really big. So I'm just going for like specs over here, right? Yeah. And then I check where is this greater than a certain number. Turns out it's less than. Bring up the detail, bring up the roughness, lower the number. And then I can use that as a weight map, maybe? So before, after. Before, after. Yeah. I'm of the opinion it's better to have detail than to not have detail. And instead of just a less than, we can totally make just a bit of a ramp. So what am I thinking? Black. I mean, is that really a ramp? A little. A little. Okay. Oh wait. Without, with. Yeah. So without, with, and now let's make these real tiny. Although, to be honest, I do like the greater than, or the less than. It's more obvious what I'm doing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Before, after, before, after, before, after. Okay. I've proven the point. It looks better. What else? What else? I could believe that the rest of this is going to be in compositing. It would go nice with some ivy on it. He doesn't look at chat. He does. Okay. So the only difference I'm seeing here is basically compositing and color. So for example, if I was to just pop in here and make this Chronos, boom, immediately different vibe. So the question is, do I have any other big things to do in the shading? Not really. Okay. Yeah, I just feel like there's so much wasted real estate. Like I could have multiple pillars and I could, but whatever. So let's try a composite. So I'm going to keep definitely the ambient occlusion. 100. This is the most important one. I'm also going to keep the normal and the position. You'll see why in a bit. No, I don't need the position. I'm going to keep the normal. And the position gave me just an idea. What is this mess? Let's clean it up just a little. I don't put as much effort into cleanup as I do in GeoNodes, but just a little. Okay, so even just that is already loads better. I did get one idea, which this color map here drives a lot of the stuff. I'm just going to throw on a light but important darkening. Random, right? So I'm going to mix color with a noise texture. That noise texture is going to get the coordinates, boom. And this is going to be low res detail, very low res. Like something like that. And this is going to be the factor that I multiply by black, or maybe the opposite. Okay? So this is just going to add a general grunge over everything. Before, after, before, after. And I think I want to invert this. Do I? Maybe. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, and it should be a multiply. Whoops. Before, after, before, after. Yeah, you can barely tell, but it is there. And it can go a maximum of 0.5. Okay, let's do a nice old render schmender. and see what I can do with this. Final chance to pick the lighting. Just matters so much. Okay, I'm happy with that. Let's render. I'm going to do that at 300 samples. This should go super quick, actually. It's very small in the frame. And no need for motion blur. Composite, render. Check this out. 1, 2, 3, 10, 30, 50. Yeah, the flutes are inverted. Okay. So here is our base. And just to work with, I'm going to put this on a very dark background. Now, my first trick of the trade is always, always, always take the ambient occlusion, which looks like this. It holds a lot of the detail, and multiply. Okay? So, we don't need this timeline. So, before, after, major trick. And you can also sharpen it with fall off. Okay? Second trick of the trade is probably color correct next. So let's see. AGX, Chronos. You know, normally I'm team Chronos. But I'm kind of feeling the AGX today. We want to go for old, not dark. Okay. White balance. Should it be a hot day? Should it be a cold day? Very cold. Cold day? I kind of feel like it should be a vaguely cold day, just a little. Hue saturation, what do we got? Saturation, no, it should be kind of washed out, honestly. Ooh, just a little green. Normally we don't like green, but just a little. Okay. Next up in the chain, always the glare node. Boom. Of course, bloom. And let's make that a little more sensitive, a little more picky, and less strong. Before, after, subtle. And now we can pick the background. I think this actually serves quite well. Normally I don't go this bright. But it kind of contrasts it a little. Perfect. Then after the glare, I throw in a vignette. That one's new in 5.0. It's just a preset. They got to clean this mess up. Okay. So here's where we started. Here's where we are. And now just kind of go back and forth. This might be definitely not that. This might be a low contrast kind of thing. I know everybody likes high contrast. Base contrast. Okay. What else? This might benefit from a shadow. I'm always kind of torn on this because if I do it like this, right? Which isn't like the biggest deal, it's no longer Nodevember. Right? So I would do something like this, and then I would make it a shadow catcher. I'm torn on it. Like, I'm sure it's allowed. I mean, there are no rules, but let's see. Before, after. Before, after. I just kind of like that it's sitting on something. Then if I do that, what if I Take this and bring it up. Take this and bring it up. Doesn't care. I think I'm gonna allow it. So a way to get around that is you just make a procedural plane or whatever, but that's fine with me. Okay, let's compare. So this is our render before. We'll render again with the shadows. I feel like making realistic old rock is like so easy to do. Like noise just plays into it. Normally too much noise is like makes your render look cheap. Yeah. When it's right, it's right. Like that just looks good. Now, dare I add one tiny bit of detail? Tiny, but big. I dare. I dare. What is that? It's going to be, what the frick is going on here? It's going to be, you see how there's all this destroyed stuff here? This one's a PNG. There's all this destroyed stuff. I'm kind of tempted to just throw on a little bit of destruction, just a little. So what would that look like? That would look like distribute, points on faces. Okay, so there's our points, but, and if we were to treat these as like tiny rocks, I only want them where they would fall and not be on the side of the wall where it doesn't make sense, right? So I'm going to take the dot product of the normal, which way it's facing, and the up direction, okay? So if I look at it like this, like that, like this, you can see we're isolating what is pointing up, and now sideways, and whatever, and I can add a threshold to that. So it really has to be pointing up. And then for that, that is the area where I'm going to allow points to spawn, before, after. And then as it goes upwards, the rocks can be bigger, because presumably the big rocks would have already fallen over. So, set point radius. I'm going to use my good old generated coordinates. It's going to be the radius it was before. And then we multiply, not just by the z, this should give us the inverted thing where the top ones are big, but by the inverted. All of this on cgmatter.com. Please join. Invert float. Boom. So presumably the big rocks are the ones that fell. And then additionally, this radius that it starts off with, which is roughly 0.05, it could be randomized, 0.01. Okay? And then the question is, what am I going to do with that? Well, I'm going to instance like a little rock, or I could have it jut out a little. No, they should probably be separate objects. So like, for example, I could instance a icosphere on the points, making sure to use the radius for the size, subdiv, join, and you can start to see the idea. Of course, we need, the rocks to be rocky, but it's not bad. I can make it quite sensitive and then somewhat distributed. So that they're not exactly overlapping. Okay. What would I do there? I would instance an icosphere. That icosphere needs to be a rock. Let me actually just throw this at the end here so that everything gets the material, including the rocks. Boop, boop, boop. So right now that's going to look like this, which you can see it's actually already not bad. I just need to take this icosphere and destroy it. So distort node, boom. Let's look at it like this. Low frequency, high detail, low strength. That's already more rock-like. More divisions. Less scale, more detail, more roughness. So let's see. Already this should be substantially better than it was before. So now these are going to be tiny little rocks. Next, we need to randomize the rotation so that they're not all facing the same way. So that can go from 0 to warp. There we go. Randomize rotation. Next up is to make the shape more interesting. So I'm going to take my rock, which isn't going to be a perfect sphere. I'm just going to take it. I'm just going to do this. Okay. Next thing to do is to make them less obvious. I'm going to make them tiny, just so they're there, but barely. I'm going to make them tiny. I'm going to make them less numerous. Okay. I think they're all rotating. Some of them are rotating up in kind of a weird way. Oh, that wasn't a random vector. If you made a floor and nodes, you could have some rocks spilling on the ground too. It is true. You're not wrong. Why can I? Random value vector. Geez. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to randomize the z and then like minus 0.5 to 0.5. Like that. Okay, now it's starting to break up a little. Now I either want many, many rocks or the exact opposite. I think I want the exact opposite. Okay, so the question is, does this add? So, before, after, zoom out, before, after, before, after. I think it adds. Then somebody's saying I could put them on the floor too. That's true. That's true. So like a very dumb, easy way to do that is to just add a grid to the spawner, which inherently is facing up. So what's the issue? Because it needs to be higher. Because it's not big enough. So now we also got rocks over there, but they're a bit floaty. Tiny bit floaty. Yeah, kinda. Just barely. Just barely. Yes. Yes. And let me just make sure. 20,000. Nope. 50. Yeah, just barely. could just vary the seed until it feels right. Yeah, that's pretty good. The radius is already bigger on the bottom. Sir? You see this? Okay. Yeah. I'm glad I took that suggestion. I think that was a good one. Okay, let's see another render. See what that looks like with the ambient occlusion on the ground. Yeah. Yeah. That's nice. Okay, final comp. Final comp. What is it that's missing? Yeah, it really is kind of like a low contrast render. Yeah. But then I can add a bit of vignette to compensate. And then is it this that's wigging me out? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. 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 Let's do a final consolidation, and then I'll do an overview of what we did so that everybody leaves, understanding, hopefully. So I'm just going to consolidate everything. Here we have our ground that I moved, and then I joined. Okay. We distributed points. Each one's a rock. We randomized some numbers. Again, anything I don't intend to touch can be minimized. Eradicated. Okay, and then we had our tiny rock, essentially. So this can be a node group called rock instance. Okay, so we have that. I join the geometry, and all of this can be our rock distribution, which I don't know if I need to expose anything because I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, join geometry, set the material, shade smooth, output. Incredible. Then I don't need that or that anymore. Nice. I approve. Okay, let's talk about what we did. What was the workflow? The workflow is I started with a foundation, which is a cube. So now's the time to pay attention. I started off with a cube. I created this base. That base was done using like a float curve that lets me make it as complicated as I want. I made a pillar, which the top part is just a Boolean. What that means is I can just go whoop, 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 whatever I want. I then did SDF processing, which, was kind of a big step. The way it worked is I took my entire pillar, that's an SDF, I made it a bit bigger, like I inflated it, and then cut out the original. So if I make it bigger and get rid of the original, now I have the shell. I took that shell, I destroyed it, so now it's like a destroyed kind of covering, and then I took the original and subtracted that away. That way some of the surface is cut out. Okay, so that's what gave us this, and then I also outputted our cutter thing, so kind of the inverse. Those I baked. Then I added cracks to it. So before, after. Those cracks, do you use this as a proximity map and then Voronoi texture for a bunch of things? I then bake this, and then you just saw me distribute the rocks, which they even catch a little on the lip. I think that's quite nice. Yeah. Okay. So there is our render. I'm going to work on it, probably not at all. After this, I'm just going to make it a nice turntable and maybe a procedural breakdown. Maybe this can be a little bit more complicated, the platform, but that's about it. So yeah. What I want to say at the end here, and there are two things, so do not leave yet. I don't allow it. Go to cgmatter.com to get the nodes if you want to recreate this yourself. Absolutely free. The generated coordinates node, the distort node, whatever. And that is a great resource, and its purpose is to get you to my website over here that has a member-only section. So nodes are free. Member-only section, $5, gets you everything. Recently, I did a tutorial that's not out yet. You can get the project file in early access. Everything Nodevember is here. Each one has a download link and the stream link, so I'm going to add day 12 after this. We have 5 years of project files, just hundreds, thousands? Hundreds. $1,000 worth of stuff. Depends on how you use it. So cgmatter.com. I'm going to type that in, but now we have part 2. Part 2, and I'm just typing in the link here, is I answer one question at the end of these streams. How many questions? One. Literally one. So if you have a question, put it in now. It will be selected from a pool. It could be Blender related. It could not be Blender related. But there's only one. That is the rule. So yesterday, I believe the question was... Yesterday, the question was something about like sound nodes in geometry nodes, or it was like the sound sampler node. So I just went over what I understood of that. So pour in your questions now, and yeah, I will wait until there's like at least 2 or 3 to choose from. So put it in now. We're about to end. It could be your question that's answered. Until then, I'll wait till there's a few. And I'll open this up. So far we have one question. Do you have an Instagram account? Will you take my ferrofluid simulation setup? Probably will you take a look at my ferrofluid simulation setup? We got 2. Roll them in. Roll them in. There's so many questions. I'm drowning. 2 questions. Anything else? Okay, here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, so our options are, do you have an Oh, we had somebody slide in. Okay, do you have an Instagram account? Will you look at my ferrofluid simulation setup? Do you consider yourself famous? What are you most proud of? Huh. Like, the obvious choice is what are you most proud of, right? Do you have a math degree? Okay. I'll get into do you have a math degree? So the short answer is yes, but I think it's more interesting than that. So I studied math. If you don't know, usually it splits into two groups. There's applied math and pure math. Applied means it's useful, pure means it's useless. And that's a joke, but it's kind of true. I studied pure math, but I tried to do like all the tracks, and the subjects that were most useful that I use every day turned out to be calculus, graph theory barely, and differential equations. Those were the important ones. The not important ones, well, you could argue, like, the one thing you do in a math major, you might think you just solve problems all day. You write proofs. So you're given a statement, and you have to say, here's how it's true, from the very beginning to the very end. So you start here, you say, given this, this is true. Given that, this is true until you get there. And then sometimes you have to go backwards. If you think about it, that is what a node network is, left to right logic. What else do I want to say about it? I picked it not for any like good reason, being like, oh, there's good job prospects, or like this would be useful for 3D, because that wasn't even a consideration. I picked it because I was good at math. That was literally it. Turned out to pay off. Yeah. And if you look at my YouTube, like my YouTube recommendations, they're all like math YouTube channels. Not like, Khan Academy shit, but like, what's a good example? There's always the 3 blue, 1 brown, but that's basic. That's commoner. Things like Numberphile, things like what's his name? Code Parade. That's a great one. Stand-up maths, stuff like that. Yeah. I feel like that was a good question, and hopefully a good answer. So thank you everybody for watching. The video on demand is going to be here. Like, it will take an hour to process, I think. Or maybe you can watch it instantly. I don't really know how it works. Mathologer, for sure. Yeah. So if you have money, cgmatter.com, check it out. Otherwise, I'm going to be posting the results of this to Twitter once I finish it tomorrow. And then we're going to move on to day 13, which is, what is day 13? It is cabin. Ooh. I'll try to do something semi-original. Okay. Cool. Thank you everybody for watching. If you can, join tomorrow, and that is it.